LGB. 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 LGB.
They say LGB everywhere I go. LGB. What it means, I don't know. LGB. Whatever it is. LGB. Kamala, help me, please. Please.
Alrighty then.
Thank you. LGB.
That's let's go, Brandon, right?
LGB.
This means let's go, Brandon.
No. LGB.
Sounds like let's go, Brandon, I guess.
LGB. All right. Let's go, Brandon.
I am Cornholio.
Chant LGB. Right wing and left wing. LGB. Go, you know the thing. LGB. If you don't sing that back. LGB. And you ain't black. LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
FJB. Let's go, Brandon.
I'm Joe Biden, and I
Forgot
this message.
Greetings, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Reading Epic Threads. I'm your host, Patrick Gunnels, joining you from Houston, Texas, this February 13th, 2024 at 8:59 a.m. Central Standard Time. Got a great show for you today. I've got four pieces I'm going to get to. The first one's going to be from Sigma Game, and then the rest are going to be from Martin Geddes. But before we get to any of that, don't forget that this show is brought to you by Angel Paste, the best lotion the world has ever known, made by patriots for patriots, consisting of only food-grade plant oils, now available in rose-infused Angel Paste. The results for your skin are amazing. Dead skin tumbles off. Eczema, psoriasis are improved. We're seeing sunburns being healed. We're seeing it being used as a shave balm, a hair conditioner. Your skin will absolutely drink it up. Go to www.epicthreads.tv or angelpaste.com. In either case, use promo code Shapiro to pry $1 from my grasping hands. The epicthreads.tv website is coming right along, and we're going to be adding new products to it. We're going to have some soap. We're going to have some nutritional supplements, some stuff that you won't be able to get anywhere else, stuff where I oversee every last aspect of formulation. There will be no poisons of any kind in products sold at epicthreads.tv. And of course, you can get the Kiss the Truther mug, which won't be available for much longer because we're tired of having to ship from Printify. We're going to figure out something else. But the Kiss the Truther mugs are very popular. All right, let's go ahead and get started today with my first selection, which is from sigmagame.substack.com, Vox Day. Gamma, a woman's perspective. A female reader shares the woman's view of the gamma male. A woman writes to share her thoughts on why women react so negatively to even a hint of gamma in a man. Keep in mind that I neither requested nor suggested this. These are strong words, but they are straight up from the mayor's mouth. Let's begin. If I reflect upon why gammas are so reflexively repulsive, it boils down to a few things. The gamma is observably shunned by society. Shunning is the weapon of choice for women. Even a whiff of it is like a drop of blood in the water to a shark. No woman will find it desirable to attach herself to someone that will extend that shunning to herself immediately and to her future children. She and her children will have greatly limited themselves in life by joining under that umbrella. Never mind that perpetual shunning points to an underlying, intolerable character flaw. The gamma is also likely to get himself cast out. In the old days, that meant death. An alpha male can be cast out and he will take some of the tribe along. He will certainly protect the woman, but the gamma is the one that pushes the pregnant love interest in front of himself as a shield. Here, cave bear, eat her, not me. He's also lazy and full of excuses. Need some mammoth meat? Go get it yourself. Life will be much harder for you and your progeny with a gamma if you survive at all. Generally, this is enough of a red flag to make the gamma radioactive. However, there is more if you observe what happens to the women that settle for gammas. The gamma is a creation of too much mothering and smothering. There is a lack of boundary between the gamma's self and the mother's self. No woman wants to insert herself into that situation. Mother-in-law from hell, anyone? It's way too crowded, and mommy is guaranteed to hate whoever comes between her and her precious boy. And don't expect the gamma to put his foot down and set boundaries on mommy's bad behavior. How damaging this is to the family dynamic is not a consideration. He likes being the center of attention. He likes being fought over by two women, e.g. Raymond, in Everyone Loves Raymond. Growing up, the gamma is told the sun and the moon rise and set upon him. He is the most intelligent, the most handsome, the most desirable. When the world reflects reality back on the gamma, he cannot bear the disconnect and spends all his time constructing delusional hat tricks to hide from that. The tell is that it is a rage-driven effort, like a child's temper tantrum. The gamma is a profoundly selfish creature and a profoundly insecure one. He will verbally abuse and gaslight and control. He is toxic. His behavior is both childlike and womanish, which activates a dual sense of peer and child. There is something hardwired in women to eschew as romantic partners by way of behavior. This is shown in movies as the besotted boy that is viewed by the most desirable woman as just a friend or like a brother. It's why in Some Like It Hot, it is plausible that Tony Curtis dressed as a woman is completely invisible to all the women around. The gamma is womanly in the way he uses passive aggression and insults to control. Yet, absent the female power hierarchy, he is badly out of context. Women relate to and categorize him the same way they do children, gay men, and trannies. Finally, the gamma is not able to love you. He is prone to obsession and stalking, which means he obsesses on his idea of you and what that brings to his self-image. That is all. Violate that fantasy in any way and brace for further machinations. It's not about you. It's entirely about him. And that is the latest. If you all don't know what is meant by a gamma male, go to sigmagame.substack.com and read the very first article. It's about the sociosexual hierarchy. Don't forget to go to epicthreads.tv. That's right, epicthreads.tv, where you can get angel paste in both unscented and rose infused. And you can go check out some epic merch, challenge coins, Kiss the Truther mug, Be Epic t-shirt, outstanding stuff. All right, we're going to get to Martin Geddes, and I'm going to catch up to the present. First, the Traffic Penalty Tribunal process complaint. From newsletter.martingeddes.com, Traffic Penalty Tribunal due process complaint. If you want to enjoy the liberties you grew up with, then defend them vigorously, by Martin Geddes. I am slowly learning about the fraud being conducted by the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency, more of which later. It feels like every single state institution in Britain is into at least one of treason, larceny, fraud, genocide, or terrorism. In the meantime, my focus is on filing appropriate notices to those who are not only infringing my travel rights, but using rigged tribunals to prevent access to justice and remedy. This may be grindingly dull stuff at one level, and far from what I would like to be writing about, but it has to be done. Pushing back against the institutionalized corruption, stealing is okay because the state told me to do it, is painful work. My Substack readership is stagnant, and that's okay. I'm not in this game to grow a media empire or pursue a writing career. The small number of us who have the dedication and perseverance to walk through this together are the right people for the right job. If you have any comments or improvements, do let me know. I am working on a parallel document that describes the fraud being committed. There is an additional fraud by DVLA that has been brought to my attention. Unless and until the military step in to remove our belligerent government, then it's down to us to push back with everything we have. If you give an inch, they will take a mile, and your children's children will carry the consequences. Freedom of movement and due process are not minor things that are to be compromised or negotiated away. Traffic Penalty Tribunal, lack of due process in law. 1. Penalty charge notice, PCN, was issued by Newcastle City Council, NCC, to Martin Geddes, MG, who objected to alleged unlawful discrimination and civil rights infringements. Martin Geddes made representations to Newcastle City Council based in equity and international treaty law, as well as statute. 2. NCC rejected these representations and offered adjudication via the Traffic Penalty Tribunal, TPT. NCC are aware of the scope and process limitations of the TPT imposed by statute and policy. 3. A hearing was held with redacted as adjudicator on 31st January 2024 via video. The hearing was conducted in accordance with the Road User Charging Schemes, Penalty Charges, Adjudication and Enforcement England, Regulations 2013, hereinafter the regulations. 4. MG made written representations in advance to the TPT that NCC's actions were unlawful based in equity and tort. This included a detailed case that the DVLA had miscategorized his vehicle based on case law of United Biscuits UK Limited versus HMRC TCC 2022 09475. MG asked the adjudicator to read his representations in advance to be clear about his standing and to apply her mind to take the right action going forward. 5. There followed no discourse as to whether the TPT was a suitable venue in that context, specifically whether it was empowered to act as surrogate court of law or was limited to private arbitration, a purely narrow administrative procedure. 6. In answer to MG's question about which jurisdiction the tribunal hearing was taking place, he was referred to ask the adjudicator during the hearing. There was insufficient time allowed to explore this matter. 7. MG asked the TPT in advance what the rules of the tribunal hearing are and was told there are none available in writing, with it left to the discretion of the adjudicator. 8. MG asked in advance whether there was an overriding objective of tribunal as per the civil procedure rules and was told there is not. By implication, the tribunal serves its paymaster, a consortium of local authorities. 9. MG asked in advance what the technical attendance limit of observers is, as he is a public figure and this is a public interest case. He was referred to ask the adjudicator at the time of the hearing. 10. 3 observers were admitted and 3 were excluded, those 2 being the primary lay legal advisors of MG and another interested party. The hearing was unfair as it excluded a substantial proportion of public observers, and potentially more observers could have attended, as many would have wished to, if a fair technical limit had been provided in advance. Publicity is the lifeblood of justice. 11. MG asked in advance for a longer hearing to allow for time to address these additional procedural and jurisdiction concerns, as well as make his case. This was denied. The hearing was limited to the standard slot, lasting only 30 minutes, with approximately 10 minutes to make his case. 12. There was no prior disclosure to forewarn that the TPT would have to refuse to consider the merits of arguments rooted in equity, constitutional law, or international treaty obligations. 13. MG made further oral representations that the actions of DVLA and NCC constituted a tort of conversion. This could be deemed a forfeit of property and travel rights without due process of law in accordance with the Bill of Rights, 1689. 14. MG made the case that the root issue was that Parliament had exceeded its authority in this instance, and that the tribunal was obligated under constitutional law to uphold the appeal and void the PCN. 15. MG furthermore asserted that this lack of lawfulness meant that the adjudication was likely ultra vires and resulted in personal liability for any loss or harm. 16. During the hearing, the adjudicator made a plea to NCC to determine if they had leeway to decline to enforce this PCN under the regulations, but NCC stated they did not have such discretion. 17. The adjudicator was aware of the likely validity of these arguments rooted in equity, tort, constitutional law, case law, treaty law, yet dismissed them as interesting in the judgment. 18. It was suggested in the hearing that judicial review was the path to justice and remedy, but this was not its purpose and is an abuse of process. It is a method of last resort to correct mistakes, not a substitute for systemic failure to uphold the law. 19. The adjudicator ruled in her judgment that she had, quote, no room to address any matters outside of the narrow list of approved reasons in the regulation to approve or deny the appeal. This elevates secondary legislation above constitutional law, equity, and international obligations to due process and non-discrimination. 20. The adjudicator failed to mention in her judgment that there is no primary legislation for clean air zones, despite it being drawn to her attention, and therefore no direction from Parliament on how to resolve contention between individual rights and collective environmental goals. This omission is unfair, as it denies MG any basis on which to later challenge the TPT's authority and acts to sabotage judicial review. 21. The TPT demonstrated that it lacked the power to challenge policy decisions of the DVLA, which are found to be unfair or inequitable. The DVLA's authority is taken as inviolable. 22. The TPT lacks the power to challenge lawfulness of the clean air zone regulations when they come into conflict with individual rights. Parliament's authority is taken as absolute and without limits on its legitimacy. 23. The TPT lacks the power to challenge constitutionality of its own adjudication process and lacks police policies and procedures to qualify its standing to adjudicate matters that are more than simply administrative. 24. The hearing was unfair as it forced MG to make a choice between asking essential procedural questions to his case, especially jurisdiction, and actually making his case. 25. The hearing was unfair because MG documented many breaches by NCC of the Nolan principles of public life, and this misconduct was not considered, rendering the adjudication lacking in a moral basis. 26. The hearing was unfair as it demonstrated the TPT does not have a duty to uphold the law or act as a court of law, but instead to bows to the opinion of the DVLA. This shows that matters of foundational law, which are legitimately part of the adjudication, including civil rights and due process, were not given the equivalent force of a court of law via S16 of the regulations. 27. The hearing was unfair as the NCC and the TPT failed to disclose its limited remit in advance, despite knowing the nature of the representations and the likely impedance mismatch. The omission of this crucial information constitutes a form of fraud leading to entrapment. 28. The hearing was unfair as the TPT knowingly acted to aid NCC in committing a conversion tort against MG. 29. The hearing was unfair as the property rights of MG were not given due consideration. These were subjected to forfeit without any procedural consideration. 30. The hearing was unfair as the civil rights of MG in relation to non-discriminatory private travel were not given room for due consideration. Instead, these were described as a, quote, subjective rather than an objective case. 31. The hearing was unfair as it elevates the opinion of the DVLA above substantive evidence and treats legal fictions like arbitrary vehicle categories repurposed from one use to another as lawful fact in violation of the principles of equity that prefer rationality. 32. The hearing was unfair as NCC were not required to clarify the legal basis of their claim, notably whether it was because the vehicle's form or its presumed commercial use. 33. The hearing was unfair as NCC were not required to evidence or substantiate their claims, effectively being a guilty until proven innocent tribunal, reversing the usual burden of proof. 34. The hearing was unfair as it allowed no counterclaim or remedy for infringement of MG's civil or property rights. 35. The hearing was unfair as it denied the possibility that Parliament, the DVLA, or NCC could act unlawfully or indeed criminally by engaging in treason or fraud with intent. 36. The adjudication was unlawful as no reasonable judge could have come to the conclusion stated based on the full facts and law, yet also simultaneously permitted the adjudication to be treated as equivalent to that of a court of law under S16 under the regulations, yet acknowledging its own defect by implication in the judgment. 37. The adjudication was unlawful as equity is the whole of the law, yet it denied access to equitable arguments and relief. MG asserts that a purpose of the TPT is to deny the public access to equity, making it unconscionable as a venue for jurisprudence. 38. The adjudication was unlawful as it failed to uphold Magna Carta 1215 S39 with a right to a fair trial, a cornerstone of legal and civil liberties. 39. The adjudication was unlawful as it imposed a forfeit of property and civil rights without charge or conviction in the breach of the Bill of Rights 1689. 40. The adjudication was unlawful as it fell short of the due process requirements of the Human Rights Act 1998 as specified via ECHR Article 6. 41. The adjudication was unlawful as it breaches the Local Government Act 1888 S78 2A, which prevents councils acting as courts. In this case, they have merely formed a consortium to attempt to evade this legal constraint. 42. The adjudication is unenforceable as S16 is unconstitutional since it denies due process and acts as an end run around the requirements requirement for a court of law, this being treason, as its purpose is to destroy the Constitution. 43. The Traffic Penalty Tribunal, TPT, is funded by Patrol, a consortium of local authorities. There exists a potential conflict of interest due to the funding of the TPT being an agent of the claimant who may at will impose unreasonable quotas within the operation of TPT with impunity to affect the outcome. As such, this lack of independence leaves the meting out of justice open to abuse. 44. The TPT itself failed to uphold the Nolan principles, in particular through failure to respond to reasonable transparency questions of jurisdiction and technical participation in a virtual hearing. This is done without consequence or accountability. 45. The summation of all these iniquities is that while the TPT may have a legitimate function in resolving some commercial and administrative disputes, it is unfit for purpose when matters of the lawfulness of the legislation it operates under are in play or civil liberty matters are raised. 46. By failing to address the lawfulness of its own conduct, the TPT operates outside of the law, and the actions of its adjudicator in this case are ultra vires. 49. While there is one final stage of appeal on the basis of failure to follow procedure or new evidence, this is declined, as to adhere further to this process is to dignify it as lawful by performance and acquiescence, and it is manifestly unlawful since it lacks fairness, due process, and constitutionality. And that is the dispute of the Traffic Penalty Tribunal. Don't forget to go to epicthreads.tv, get your angel paste, get your merch, use promo code Shapiro. All right. Make sure I get the right one here. The white man van fraud case laid bare. All right, here we go. From newsletter.martingeddes.com, the white van man fraud case laid bare. Both the DVLA and local councils are committing criminal acts with clean air zones. By Martin Geddes. As part of my ongoing pushback against the abuse of power by Newcastle City Council, the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency, and the Traffic Penalty Tribunal, I have prepared the following statement that lays out two criminal frauds. The first is how every vehicle that can be used for commercial goods is treated as if it necessarily must be, in violation of case law and equity principles. The second fraud is how councils divert anyone trying to get justice away from courts of law into rigged tribunals. This will be going to the parties involved tomorrow. Any feedback before then is welcome. There is a much bigger fraud going on, which is the coercive way in which private entities like DVLA operate in order to strip us of our property and travel rights. That's a topic I've been researching and preparing to write about, as it ties into a broader assault on our freedom of movement. The eco-fascist agenda will doubtless intensify until it breaks, as the enabling state surveillance infrastructure offers irresistible levels to control to psychopaths. My very modest white Ford Escort van, which I can just about afford to keep on the road, is integral to my work and quality of life. I took it for granted growing up that I could freely move around my own country and drive in cities and national parks. The COVID lockdowns showed us how those freedoms can disappear in days. I have no idea if my determination to keep my private conveyance free from these thieves will succeed, but at a minimum, if it gives them pause for thought and inspiration to others to remove their consent from the abusers. DVLA and local authority criminal fraud abetted by the Traffic Penalty Tribunal by knowing miscategorization of N1 vehicles and knowing misdirection of appellants seeking lawful justice for financial gain and causing loss to the traveling public. 1. DVLA is an executive agency that administers the licensing of drivers and vehicles with statutory authority under the Road Traffic Act 1988, the Vehicle Excise and Registration Act 1994, the Road Traffic Driver Licensing and Information Systems Act 1989, and the Road Safety Act 2006. 2. DVLA participates in the enforcement of clean air zones and low emission zones established through the authority of the Transport Act 2000 and enforced through the Road User Charging Schemes, Penalty Charges, Adjudication and Enforcement England Regulations 2013. 3. DVLA uses data collected through the vehicle registration process as shown on a V5C and turns this into a CAZ vehicle type. This information, V5C plus CAZ vehicle type, is used by local authorities to enforce varying restrictive environmental policies for travel, e.g., which differ in London, Newcastle, Bath, Durham, and Glasgow. 4. The V5C data includes multiple fields, including vehicle category, e.g. N1, make, e.g. Ford, model, e.g. Escort 55D, body type, e.g. car-derived van, taxation class, e.g. light goods vehicle, type approval number, e.g. J108T, as well as technical characteristics like fuel type, weight, axles, cylinder capacity, and color. 5. The taxation class of light goods vehicle was previously private light goods prior to C2001, which legally implies permission is required for any loss of private property right. 6. This multiplicity of data types affords an opportunity for confusion and even criminal fraud by misrepresenting vehicles in operation for financial gain. The central matter is that data obtained in one context, road tax, to enable exercise of a property right, is knowingly misused in a completely different context, usage restriction limiting a travel right to the gain of one party, a local authority, and loss of another, the traveling public. 7. Local authorities, LAs, charge for and or prohibit certain vehicles in regulated zones with additional penalty charges for unpaid levies. These levies are typically applied to vehicles deemed commercial, e.g. in London, without regard to their actual use, as well as non-commercial traffic in some instances, e.g. London's ULEZ Glasgow, with exemptions for private cars in some circumstances, e.g. Newcastle. 8. These revenues are attributed to the local authority itself. As such, there is a financial incentive to draw the net for enforcement as widely as possible without taking into consideration the equitable treatment of the public or competing civil rights to the goal of cleaner air, including other health and safeguarding needs. There is no primary legislation for air pollution zones that defines how any contention between liberties is to be resolved. 9. The actual data about actual vehicle usage, most importantly the insurance classification of vehicles, not held by DVLA if it exists anywhere in digital form. There is at present no central means to access such information. 10. Penalties are being issued to members of the public who are essentially fined for the style of their private vehicle as detailed below. If DVLA said your car was a HGV and wanted thousands of pounds in road tax, we would vigorously object, as that is a fraudulent misrepresentation. This case is no different in substance. It is an untruth being propagated for commercial gain, albeit more subtle in form. 11. DVLA's vehicle categorization is based on its legacy business of road taxation, and most vehicles are either Class M, passenger transport, or Class N, goods transport. These relate to the objective properties of the vehicle and any burden it likely places on the highway system as a result of use, charging, for instance, a 52-seat coach more than a 2-seat sports car. 12. The payment of the road tax allows the full exercise of the property right of the vehicle on the UK's highways, subject to an MOT, insurance, etc. The vehicle type categorization places no restriction on the usage rights of the vehicle. You can use an ordinary saloon car in commerce or for a cargo of goods. Conversely, if you really wanted to and were insured for such use, you could undertake a private social trip in a heavy goods vehicle. 13. Some vehicles are ordinary and usual conveyances for private use, and all M1 category vehicles would be regarded as such, with some M2 vehicles, e.g. conversion vans, would also qualify. It has long been recognized in law that there are inviolable travel rights attached to an ordinary and usual private conveyance, which includes non-discrimination. 14. Newcastle City Council is claiming the authority, right, and duty to charge for a car-derived van with type N1 for its clean air zone, even when used purely for social, domestic, and pleasure use, and not insured for commercial use. This creates a differential treatment to an otherwise identical conveyance that has a saloon, hatchback, or estate body being used privately, which is not charged. 15. In PCN NA 0039-2312, as adjudicated by the Traffic Penalty Tribunal, it was judged that an N1 vehicle must be charged, as the regulations are based solely on the DVLA vehicle type. This makes the vehicle type, in this case N1, the sole determining factor without regard to the facts of usage or any other data field that the DVLA captures or infers. 16. This is a conversion tort. turning a property right into a usage restriction. It is also a forfeit without crime or conviction, as it burdens those inalienable rights to private property and private travel in contravention to the Bill of Rights 1689. As such, it is clearly a loss being imposed on the public and is done so through a knowing misrepresentation of property data, e.g. light goods vehicle, as use data, e.g. commercial cargo transporter. 17. In PCNs NA 1043-802A and NA 1037-5892 NCC make the case that the vehicle is chargeable based on the DVLA's categorization of the same vehicle as a van for clean air purposes. There cannot be two different bases for the charge, N1 vehicle type and van CAZ vehicle type. This inconsistency calls into question the objectivity of the charging scheme. Is this an administrative wrinkle or something more serious? 18. Transportation for London, TfL, are unequivocal that they charge all commercial vehicles for the low emission zone, LEZ fee, claiming the authority to regulate based on DVLA property registration classification alone. Once again, we see data taken for one liberty enhancing purpose, pay road tax to enjoy an unfettered right to travel, being used in the opposite circumstance, property encumbrance and loss of travel rights, without regard to the veracity of the data being used. 19. In United Biscuits v. Customs and Excise 1991, it was ruled that the relevant factors in classifying for tax purposes were matters of substance and not form, specifically what the product was made from, used for, and became, not how it was marketed, packaged, or of the opinion of third parties. Hence, Jaffa cakes are cakes and exempt from VAT as essential items, and not biscuits, which are a luxury good. 20. On this basis, the body style of an N1 vehicle, when it is the only thing that differentiates from an identical M1 vehicle, is purely a matter of form and not substance. There is no lawful authority for the regulation of the body style of vehicles in the name of clean air. Therefore, the implied claim is that vans of all styles are commercial in nature, as TfL make explicit. 21. In Payne and Ors via HMRC 2020 EWCA Civ 889, a case involved Coca-Cola and HMRC, a dispute centered on the tax classification of certain vehicles provided by Coca-Cola to its employees. Specifically, the dispute was over whether 3 commercial vehicles, 2 Volkswagen Combi vehicles, and 1 Vauxhall Vivaro would be classified as cars or vans for tax purposes. The Court of Appeal ruled against Coca-Cola, finding that the vehicles should be classified as cars for tax purposes. 22. This decision had significant tax implications for Coca-Cola, as the classification of these vehicles as cars rather than vans meant higher tax liabilities due to different tax treatments for cars and vans in the UK. In this context, the tax burden falls the other way onto cars, but the point is that tax classification is more than simply a mapping of the DVLA registration type class. 23. The Court of Appeal ruled that the primary suitability to a conveyance of goods was not sufficient to make these vehicles into a van. Multi-purpose vehicles may have no primary suitability at all. On this basis, it is clear that for several years there has been a nuanced treatment of vehicles as cars or vans for tax purposes in case law, with a dividing line that depends on context and use. A car-derived van is a multi-purpose evidenced by actual usage, as well as industry articles urging you to buy one as such. 24. That competing claims to charge for a CAZ/LEZ in different locations are based on vehicle type, body style, tax class, and derived CAZ class, none of which align to actual use or insurance details. This disparity of justifications that are not objectively related to emissions should be a red flag and raise concerns of lawfulness. The absence of any consideration of the impact or miscategorization of travel rights of the public, with consequent potential for harm, shows an intent that does not serve the public interest. 25. It is one thing for a multinational like Coca-Cola to contest tax classification in higher civil courts, quite another for ordinary members of the public. Where is the dividing line between an ordinary civil dispute over a misplaced administrative policy, such as with Jaffa Cakes or Vauxhall Vivaros, and a criminal fraud that deprives the public of their money and property based on a knowing falsehood? The claim here is that DVLA and the LAs have deliberately crossed that red line enabled by the Traffic Penalty Tribunal as cover. 26. The loss of equitable passage over the public highway is an incalculable harm beyond price. In Ex parte Lewis, 1888, 21 QBD 191, Wills J. said at page 197, quote, "The only dedication in the legal sense that we are aware of is that of a public right of passage, of which the legal description is a right for all Her Majesty's subjects at all seasons of the year freely and at their will to pass and repass without let or hindrance." Modern sentiment reflects the inalienable nature of the right to travel without discrimination. 27. The Fraud Act 2006 S2 defines the offense of fraud by misrepresentation, whereby a person is in breach by dishonestly making a false representation to make a gain for himself or another, or to cause loss to another, or to expose another to a risk of loss. Said representation is false if it is untrue or misleading, and the person making it knows that it is or might be untrue or misleading. This is the situation with the application of DVLA data to clean air and low emissions zones. 28. DVLA and the LAs are making a sweeping claim that any vehicle with a van body style that of itself causes harm to nobody is necessarily commercial in operation, causing it to become subject to stiff charges that impact ordinary use. This is a knowing misrepresentation to the commercial gain of local authorities and the financial freedom and freedom loss of the public, and therefore constitutes a criminal fraud. 29. This fraud is an abuse of the Transport Act's 2000's indirect authority for clean air zones. It is tantamount to highway robbery, automated by computers. It is self-evident that many people use small vans as their primary personal transport, demonstrated by an enthusiast movement for van life. This fraud is especially egregious in the case of car-derived vans, where every moving part is identical to other cars that are given a free pass with respect to CAZ or LEZ charges. 30. The public have a right to choose an ordinary and usual conveyance that meets their personal needs. This includes the use of an N1 vehicle, e.g. Ford Escort van, for personal, social, domestic, and pleasure use. This is evidenced by the ease of obtaining insurance on this base and the equal footing of road tax without any difference of substance, only style. The false classification of all vans as commercial is willful misrepresentation given the sophistication of the parties involved. 31. There is no lawful obligation to arrange one's property or travel for the administrative convenience of clean air zones. It is perfectly acceptable to use a car-derived van for passenger transport and personal cargo. This is inequitable treatment, rides roughshod over individual property and travel rights, and grossly infringes other protected rights, such as access to health care or the freedom to protest. Such recklessness to the rule of law indicates mens rea. The motive is money, not health. 32. The data collected by DVLA is being misused in contravention of the Data Protection Act 2018. While the DVLA is acting as joint controller and data processor, the traveler here is the ultimate controller, having the first and last word. It is worth noting that DVLA has committed an unlawful conversion of name, which on the issued license is no longer reflective of the primary identification and registration of the birth certificate. The driving license field labeled name is a surname, and the first name is a title, concatenated to the first names, which are all in capitals, unlike the registered name. This establishes a baseline of intent to mislead. 33. In our context, the specific part of the Act contravened in this situation is Article 5(1)(d), which pertains to the accuracy of personal data. CAZ vehicle type as van on relates to a matter of form, not substance, so is inaccurate in the context. Additionally, there is a failure to process data lawfully, fairly, and transparently in breach of the principles set out under Article 5(1)(a), as data collected for one purpose is being used opaquely for another. 34. The DVLA is also issuing inaccurate data for enforcement purposes. This raises concerns under Article 5(1)(c), which requires that personal data be, quote, adequate, relevant, and limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which they are processed, end quote. The use of multiple competing attributes collected for one use to facilitate an unrelated revenue stream with distinct semantics on a punitive basis is clearly wrong. 35. Whether a specific vehicle is compliant, e.g. Euro 3 versus Euro 6, is irrelevant to whether there is fraud within this context. Clean air zones are innately related to the actual pollution of usage, not the property right or the body style, nor the imputed cargo of passengers or transport. The misrepresentation is the creation of a false classification of CAZ vehicle type for gain. 36. The fraud is compounded by how LAs use the Traffic Penalty Tribunal to misdirect any affected member of the public into a private administrative tribunal that does not uphold the rule of law and treats any classification by DVLA as if written on a tablet of stone handed down by our Creator. Those affected by the fraud are left with only judicial review as remedy, a hurdle very few can afford to overcome. 37. As such, LAs are not only enriching themselves inequitably through data laundering, blame to the DVLA who facilitate the fraud, but are also actively denying the public access to lawful remedy. This compounds the wrongdoing. 38. Every single aspect of this matter points to unlawful intent by the parties involved, namely NCC and the TPT, the conversion tort involved, the lack of respect for constitutional due process, the inversion of case law, the violation of statute on data protection, the obliteration of equity, the denial of international treaty obligations, and fraudulent abuse of administrative policy. 39. The underlying fraud involving the DVLA miscategorizing vehicles for gain is a matter of public importance and interest, as many are affected. Yet it is the willful misdirection by LAs that constitutes a serious omission in criminal law. Any member of the public who identifies criminal behavior is diverted to an alternative dispute resolution tribunal rather than a court of law. This venue, by design, will not uphold the law, nor will it address grievances with the DVLA, defective legislation, or forfeits without due process. 40. Specifically, by knowingly omitting that the Traffic Penalty Tribunal would not address matters beyond pure administrative process, the Newcastle City Council committed fraud under S3 of the Fraud Act 2006, as this is an omission that there was a legal duty to disclose. The duty arises from the principles of natural justice, which include the right to a fair hearing and the right to be heard by a competent authority, as well as duty of care that public bodies owe to individuals in providing accurate and comprehensive information about their legal rights and the processes available to them. 41. That the said fraud appears to have been endorsed by Parliament, even if tacitly, calls into question the true intent of these environmental schemes. The absence of primary legislation that addresses civil liberties and enforcement via a compromised tribunal lacking due process and fairness is indicative that lawfulness was not Parliament's top priority. All right. That's the next one from our excellent friend, Martin Geddes. Don't forget, guys, this is what he does for a living. He was drummed out of a lucrative career in telecommunications because he's a patriot. So go to martingeddes.com/support to support what he does. Also, don't forget to go to epicthreads.tv, where you can get our epic merch, where you can get both the unscented and rose-infused versions of Angel Paste. If you get more than $150 in an order, you get free shipping. So check it out, epicthreads.tv. Now let's finish out our show with one more piece from Martin Geddes entitled, I Can't Hear a Fucking Thing. The Irony of Antifa. I can't hear a fucking thing. The irony of Antifa. My first encounter with provocateurs, resulting in a minor assault at a protest. By Martin Geddes. I have counted up how many freedom demonstrations or rallies I've been to and photographed for the historic record, and it is 27 prior to going to Manchester on Saturday. I may have sympathies with the overall cause, but I don't necessarily agree with every message or speaker. My job is to capture what is happening from ground level and not with a super long telephoto lens standing on top of a rubbish bin. I noted an event organized by Students Against Tyranny in Manchester and decided to break a long drive by attending as an independent photojournalist and historian. The rally was always going to be a small one, held on a tiny mound in the campus of Manchester University. As part of my pre-event wanderings with my camera, I meandered past the Turing building, read up on the new Graphene Institute, and noted the endless stickers on every piece of street furniture. I personally am more inclined to support the techno club nights than violent communism as a pastime, but we all have different hobbies and tastes. I have never had any contact with the organizers and am perfectly entitled to hear what they have to say. I was quite surprised to find the mound, with no speakers yet present, surrounded by police who were holding back a group of far-left activists, many of whom were wearing their compulsory slave muzzles because we all like to be absorbed into the hive mind, depersonalized, and seemingly unaccountable for our actions. They were making quite a din. but I had no reason to feel any malice towards them. I clambered up onto the mound to grab a shot of their message, as I naively believed they would welcome it being spread around. Isn't that the whole point of a banner in a public place? Their banner is gays against Nazis, I think. So, yeah, gays against Nazis. Nipping behind their lines, I wanted to just get shots of the other banners against the background of the buildings before I knew it. My view was blocked by umbrellas, my way forward halted by an aggressive masked protester, and I was being jostled. This is actually a criminal assault, so I simply loudly said, "Leave me alone and let the police do their things." I knew I was fundamentally safe, as there were so many police present. Still, it is the first time in my life beyond the school playground where I have been assaulted. They are trained to goad you into a response, and I grabbed a few angry shots under provocation. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on me. Anyone who knows me personally can tell you that I qualify as an honorary member of Gays Against Nazis, even if I do not align to this specific group of agents provocateurs. I am also an ally to those who, as adults, make a free choice to transition or detransition. There are stories I cannot tell to protect the privacy of others. I have been attacked by fascist corporations and fought endlessly against tyranny. My ex-boyfriend is Malaysian Chinese, the one before Jewish, and my ex-wife is a Lithuanian and nominally Catholic. I am probably not the one to scream at right in my face that I am a racist, fascist Nazi. The Antifa crowd were determined to use their own free speech right to oppose those rallying for free speech. They seemed oblivious to the irony of their own deafness, disrupting the speeches with loud music and shouting, "We can't hear a fucking thing." Yes, you can't hear a thing, and that's your problem. Somewhere in the universe there is a counter of contradictions, and it ticks over fast for this crowd. Over and over they chanted their intimidatory slogan, "There are many, many more of us than you." The universe responded and sent hundreds of protesters against Gaza genocide through the square, making Antifa many, many fewer. The Antifa crowd seemed to be perplexed, and the right-wing extremist, racist, fascist Nazis were also not keen on genocide and soon slunk off. I had a few chats with various people, the police liaison officer in her blue jacket, a solicitor on his day off acting as a lawful observer, and a couple of bystanders perplexed by the whole situation. I have an intuitive sense that the Antifa lot realized belatedly that I was just an observer and that they had wrongly put me in a box of enemy. They didn't look me in the eye when I looked at them, indication of shame, although one did brush past me to invade my personal space again. The most interesting part of the whole thing for me was the police response. I have come to appreciate the work the police do in the course of documenting these events. I personally have never seen the police act in an aggressive or biased way, but I have seen them work in very difficult circumstances, like the medieval streets of York filled with smoke from flares in order to protect the public and keep the peace. I make a point of thanking them on every protest for keeping us safe and appreciating what they do. At the end of the day, they did protect the space for free speech in Manchester, and they did protect me personally when I was assaulted. Most people, including the bulk of the police, then dispersed, allowing the speeches to take place and be live streamed, and at last I can play properly by putting on different lenses and getting a sense of the scenery, super wide, wacky portraits. What is important was what was said was possible to say in public, not necessarily that anyone was listening to it. There were some very sad things to reflect on as more people are injured and killed from the poison poke. There was a love expressed for the lost souls of Antifa and hope they could eventually hear a message of redemption. There was a more angry speech about the Islamization of local government, and it is how it is. Perhaps one of the more enlivening parts of the day were those handing out their great controversy book. I don't wish to dive into the rights or wrongs of particular sects of movements. I did have a long conversation with a delightful black lady about Bible matters. My mother is a lifelong Jehovah's Witness, so I am comfortable talking spiritual matters with Catholics, Freemasons, Adventists, Muslims, Marxists, and all kinds. I don't have to agree with any of them, and nobody has a monopoly on truth in my cosmology. We are all deceived in some way. At the end of the day, the message was a simple one of equality under the law. It is wrong to discriminate, yet essential to discern. We have free speech not only so we can hear the good ideas that challenge us, but also so that we can more easily recognize fools, narcissists, criminals, psychopaths, traitors, lunatics, subversives, infiltrators, maniacs, morons, and cults. If someone is a racist, fascist, Nazi, then I want to know so I can keep well away from him. Suppressing speech only leads to conflict and violence down the road. The discomfort is a feature, not a bug. This is the first time that I ever had a bad vibe at a rally, but it didn't leave a bad taste. On a long drive to London afterwards via some friends, I reflected on the lessons of the day. The Antifa assault had caught me somewhat off guard. Being a peaceful person, it is too easy to assume others are the same way. They were a literal mob. Taking individually, I suspect they would be easier to interact with and likely embarrassed by their mischaracterization of me and my intentions. My purpose is to record the zeitgeist and events that professional documentarians avoid. One of the interesting things that happened afterwards is when I posted some images from the day on social media. I did speak to the organizer, James, and I did take his photograph. I was then accused of actively promoting a Holocaust denier. I am not going to fall into the trap of discussing that subject. What matters is that I am a citizen journalist, and I am equally comfortable photographing the lost souls of Antifa, the considerably more friendly Palestinian protesters, or the right-wing free speech absolutist advocates. I am not burnished or tarnished by simply recording reality. As a parting observation, one of the speakers addressed the police, who by that time were not listening. It doesn't matter. My sense is that many of them are noble men and women doing a thankless and sometimes dangerous job. They are put in impossible positions, asked to uphold the law and keep the peace, while directed under treacherous politicians and woke leadership. The speaker said it, quote, was not the uniform that makes the person, but the person that makes the uniform. No matter what uniform someone puts on, even Antifa, we must keep seeing their humanity. And that's our show for today. Don't forget, go to sigmagame.substack.com, run by the brilliant Box Day. Go to newsletter.martingeddes.com and keep up with the saga of Martin Geddes versus the oppressive state. And of course, go to epicthreads.tv, the home of Angel Paste and the home of many more things to come. You buy more than $150 worth, you get free shipping. Angel Paste, your skin will drink it up. Let us pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you tomorrow.
I will be the greatest president that God ever created.